Christ's letters. Continuation of letter 3. To descend from my state of consciousness to the conditions of my time on earth is prompted only by my love for mankind. For 2,000 years, Christians have been relieving the trauma of my crucifixion. Some people have even experienced the stigma, which is nothing more than a hysterical and morbidly emotional response to what they believe I endured. People have worked themselves up into an emotional pitch akin to frenzy whilst imagining the anguish of my suffering before my death. Their emotional gratitude for what I endured sends them into a state of physical distress. This is being written on your Good Friday, and I have come especially to talk to you about my crucifixion and to tell you that you must abandon all the drama associated with the remembrance of this day. I died, and that was, for me, a wondrous release. It is time that people wake up from their long, long dream and come to understand existence as it really is, and the truth concerning my crucifixion, which has been hidden till this time. On Good Fridays, year after year, down the centuries, you have created a contaminated, traumatic consciousness state of being throughout the world, as far removed from the spiritual dimension of universal creative consciousness as hell is removed from heaven. Now that I have chosen to relive my life on earth in the persona of Jesus through the mind of the one who is receiving my words, in order to help the world move on to a new phase of spiritual, mental development, I ask those who can receive my words to give up this practice of remembering my death and exercising physical self-denial during your Lenten fast to commemorate my 40 days in the desert. As you must realize from this narrative, my time in the desert was one of great joy and blessedness of spirit. Number 6. Events prior to my death. Many events of great spiritual significance took place just prior to my death, which are excellent examples of the great cosmic laws in action within your dimension of existence. I am now giving you a brief account of those important events, since it is my purpose to enlighten your minds wholly, to give you knowledge beyond any knowledge yet received by any other person in your universe. When I began to prepare my disciples for my approaching death, it was an immense, difficult task. They could scarcely contain their shock and astonishment. The thought of my being crucified as an ordinary felon was repellent beyond words, and neither did they want to lose me from their midst. I had called them to follow me and leave behind lives which had been fairly prosperous. They had left their families and homes to rebuild their lives around me and my work. They had taken pride in my progress through the towns. They had been willing to be associated with me and be known as my disciples despite the rejection and harsh criticism of their religious leaders. Furthermore, they loved and respected me, both for the way I lived my own teachings and the way I had compassionately healed so many people and brought them comfort in their unhappy lives. They truly believed I was the Son of God. How could the Son of God end up on the cross? They asked each other. Their horror increased with every question. It was unthinkable. They felt a tremendous void opening up in front of them. A void in their lives and a huge crater in the earth on which they walked, and a vast expanse of instability and lack of purpose within themselves. What I told them about my future crucifixion, they dared not contemplate. Such an event would destroy everything they had believed in with all their hearts. Consequently, my disciples loudly and volubly resisted what I tried to tell them and stated again and again that such a thing could never be. When I stood firm against their stubborn denials, they were eventually forced to quieten their arguments and outwardly accept that such a thing might be possible. I told them after my death, I told them that after my death, they would see me again and that I expected them to carry on the work I had started. The pain and argumentativeness I had aroused in my disciples also affected me deeply. It was no easy undertaking to go to Jerusalem where my fate awaited me. More than anything, I wondered how I would measure up to this great challenge of my endurance. Would I be able to transcend the physical condition and enter into the universal Father consciousness and remain there until I died? At times, I was deeply frightened of the ordeal, but I dare not reveal this fear to my disciples. Therefore, I began my last journey towards Jerusalem with powerfully mixed feelings. On the one hand, I was wary of healing and talking and teaching people who listened with open mouths and had no real understanding of anything I was trying to tell them. I had thought that my knowledge would enable people to climb out of their misery and, at the very least, make contact with the Father and gain a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven. There had been no evidence of such a spiritual awakening, even amongst my disciples. My disappointment and sense of failure made me glad to be moving on from the earth life to the glorious existence I knew awaited me after my death. At the same time, I wondered how I would endure the pain of the crucifixion. Throughout my mission, I had lived in a more or less consistently peaceful, frequently exalted state of mind, with my thoughts focused on the Father love consciousness, author of all being, knowing that I had but to ask and what I asked for would swiftly manifest itself. Would I be able to keep my equanimity when brought before the council, when led out to my crucifixion, when nailed to the cross with my weight hanging from my hands? Because I was now giving way to doubts and fears, the normal level of my consciousness frequencies were dropping. They were taking me down into the frequencies of the earth plane consciousness. I became a prey again to my old aggression, prompting me to unreasonable actions I would never have contemplated earlier when in my former state of total harmony with the Father love consciousness. My doubts and conflicts externalized in my life as human emotions and impulses which contravened the cosmic law of love. First, there was the episode of the fig tree. I was hungry and went to the tree, not really expecting to find fruit because it was not the right season for figs. When my search was unfruitful, I cursed the fig tree. 24 hours later, it was shriveled to its roots. It was a shocking experience. It was the first time my words had caused harm to anything. However, it clearly demonstrated for my disciples the power of thought for good or evil. It showed them that the more spiritually evolved a person is, the greater is the impact of their words on the environment. I took the opportunity to point out to my disciples that I had thoughtlessly behaved as does the average man or woman who, when having high expectations, cannot get what they want. They usually react with anger, tears, hostility, and even sharp words which might or might not amount to a kind of ill-wishing or cursing of the person who has denied them their heart's desire. They had now seen for themselves what my cursing had done to the fig tree. They should now be able to understand that whilst a strong conviction would bring about anything they might desire and imagine, they must also be constantly aware of their own mental emotional condition. They must not harbor resentment against others but must swiftly forgive. Otherwise, they could do much damage to those they resented, which damage would return to them in due course as a harvest of their sowing. Furthermore, as one sows, so does one reap. I knew that what I had done to the fig tree would inevitably return to me in one form or another. I took my disciples to the temple. It was many years since I had been there, and I knew my visit would serve to set in train the events which would lead to my crucifixion. Some of the people recognized me, and in response to their requests, I began to teach them. More people gathered and crowded the moneylenders who began to complain. Their shouting and loud complaints broke my train of thought as I was teaching. Suddenly my wrath was aroused. Here were people earnestly gathered around me, wanting to hear the words of life which soon I would not be able to speak to them, and there were the moneylenders who made their living by selling livestock for sacrifices which did the people no good whatever. These men only brought people into debt and misery. I felt a rush of blood to my head, and I pushed the tables over, scattering their money, and I drove the money-hearted men out of the temple. Now there was a great commotion of shouting and screaming. Some people were scrambling to pick up the money. The money-lenders were calling down curses on my head, denouncing me as evil, as one doing the work of Beelzebub and 1,000 other evils. The priests and Pharisees and all the people who set great store by the sacrifices in the temple came running together to find out the cause of the noise and confusion. On hearing the moneylenders' story, they were so outraged by my actions, they launched into vociferous condemnation of me and lamentations to impress the priests, each one making louder protest than their neighbors to demonstrate their horror at what I had done. Such a thing had never been seen in the temple before. Even those who had previously listened to me were now disturbed at my willfulness and wondered what kind of man I might be. They were standing close together, watching the proceedings, when they were noticed and approached by the priests and Pharisees, who persuaded them I was trying to destroy all they had believed in, preaching a false god entirely unlike anything they had ever heard about in their synagogues. The priests passed on their own outraged anger to the people and convinced them that my sin would contaminate them also if they persisted in listening to my madness. Gradually, the people were persuaded I was an evil influence and should be removed before I could disrupt the peace of the country and bring down the wrath of the Roman governor on the entire country of Palestine. My disciples, ashamed of what I had done, quietly left the scene and hid amongst the alleys some way from the temple. When they returned to me later, they clearly showed they were also sorely tried by my actions. They wondered whether I had taken leave of my senses, gone mad, prophesying my death, and then doing those very things which would probably be the cause of it. It was at that time that Judas, who had never fully shed his Jewish beliefs, began to doubt whether I was the Messiah after all. 3 years I had taught the people, and there was no lessening of the Roman rule. 3 years and people were no nearer the happiness I had promised them, and now it seemed that I was about to become a disturber of the peace, bringing down the wrath of Rome on their heads. He heard that a Jewish high priest wanted to get rid of me, and so he offered his services to identify my person when required to do so. When it was time for me to eat the Passover with my disciples, I arranged we should eat it all together in a large supper room. I knew it would be the last time I would eat any food on earth. I do not want to return deeply to the consciousness of that night. Thank you. I love you. God bless you. See you tomorrow. Bye.